No mai haere mai ki tangata o Wharangi, ki te kaupapa I tēnei rā. Welcome to this webinar on the annual plan and the parking policy for you, the people of the Western Wards. My name is Esther Buchholz of Solstone, and I will be your MC and your host today. First, as is the custom with Wellington City Council meetings, we will begin with a karakia, whakataka te hau, a beautiful karakia that evokes the power of the natural environment for the purposes of this meeting. So please read or say it with me if you would like to. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora. Thank you. And let us begin. So just to start, a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you who are not familiar with webinars, there is on the right-hand side, you have a dialogue box, and you can use this to manipulate your screen as you would like to have it, as you would like to see the speakers. So please have a tutu, have a play. You as attendees are on mute, but you can communicate with us by sending in questions in the drop-down chat box. We already have our first 3 questions come through. Thank you very much. And we'll be picking those up throughout the webinar. We've also given you handouts in the dialogue box. So if you drop down that key, you'll see 4 handouts, one about cycleways, one about the annual plan, one about the parking policy, PowerPoint of this session, and also an accessible version of that PowerPoint. This session is being recorded so that others can see it afterwards, or those who couldn't make it today. So when you get that link from us after this webinar, please do share it in your networks. Today's agenda. Well, in recent weeks, life has changed in ways that we simply couldn't have imagined. And we've all had to adopt to new ways of living and working, and in this case, consulting with the community. So these sessions are designed as an alternative to the Wellington City Council face-to-face public engagements that Council has been able to offer in the past. We will start, the first half hour will be presentations on the annual plan and parking policy, and we'll be taking some questions on that. And then the second half will be a question and answer panel with the Mayor and your local ward councillors. So if I could invite the panel in for today to introduce themselves. And we do have sincere apologies from Councillor Rebecca Matthews, who really wanted to be with you here today, but who's had to travel to visit a seriously ill family member. Very disappointed not to be here. However, we do have the rest of the panel, and I'll invite you now to introduce yourselves, starting off with Mayor Andy Foster.
Kia ora koutou, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us and for giving up some time on what is a beautiful day. I am privileged to be your mayor, and I've also been privileged to serve the Onslow Western Ward for many years, and I live in Karori.
Thank you. And welcome, Councillor Wolf.
Kia ora, everyone. I'm a born and bred Wellingtonian, lived half my life over in Wharangi, Onslow Western, and the rest in the eastern suburbs. I'm looking forward to this webinar.
And welcome, Councillor Calvert. You're on mute.
You're still on. You're on. Good. Technology problems, yes. Hi everyone, I'm Diane Calvert, one of the local ward councillors, and I'm very impressed anybody who's listening to this live on this wonderful Saturday morning.
Agreed. And welcome Councillor Condi, who will be speaking to us on the parking policy.
Kia ora mai tātou, I'm Jenny Condi, I'm a councillor out in Takapū Northern Ward, and I've got the parking portfolio, so I'm here to talk about the parking policy today.
Great, thank you very much, and panel, we'll be inviting you back shortly. In the meantime, the first thing I'd like to do before Andy's presentation on the annual plan is we'd like to launch a poll. So just to understand how you, those of you who have turned up today, what you know or have already read about the annual plan. So if you could launch that Olivia. This is going to help Andy to pitch his presentation to you. So could you just let us know whether you got a chance to look at the Wellington City Council annual plan online? Tick the box that most fits with your experience of it. Nope, you haven't seen it yet. You've managed to skim through it, or you've had a really thorough read. So have we got some of those coming in, Olivia?
Yes, those results have come in. We've had a large number of our participants today already have their say there. So I'm going to close that poll now and share the results with you.
Oh, fantastic. So Andy, about 40% of people haven't seen it yet. So your overview will be really important in your presentation here. Thank you, Olivia. If you could close that and go on to oh, sorry, one more thing. So that's a little bit about us and the day. So let's find out about you. So most of you who are on this webinar today are from the Wharangi Onslow Western Ward. And there will also be a lot of people watching this webinar afterwards, so welcome to you too. You asked us some questions. You have some questions about the annual plan and the parking policy, and these are kind of the major themes in those pre-registration questions. And you also asked us some questions about your local community, which we will be putting to the panel at the end. And here's some of the key things that we will be posing to the panel. You can also pose questions live, so please do that. We'll be working with both. Those questions that we don't have time to answer today or are more technical in nature, the officers will be working on those behind the scenes and posting them on the Let's Talk website as frequently asked questions. So fear not, your questions will be answered. So on that note, Andy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Esther. Right, well, welcome again, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to be here today with you. We're going to start off just a little bit on COVID-19's impact on Wellington. Obviously, we don't know the full impact of that yet. For many of us, we are still, well, obviously, we've all been through the lockdown process, and it's good to see us coming out the other side and the city starting to get back to life again. But for many of us, we are still employed. We're still in the jobs we were before. Many of us were able to do all kinds of Zooming and Microsoft Teams and other sorts of things from home, and it was just as busy as ever, if not more so. But for some people, that's not the case, and we know that there are many sectors, particularly those exposed to tourism, retail, the hospitality, events areas, where the effects are really significant, and we don't know quite how that is going to play out and how many jobs will be lost, but we know that it could well be quite a few. So essentially, COVID-19 has had a significant effect on a lot of us, all in different ways. And it has also meant that a lot of the things that we were intending to do have been either slowed down, or we're going to have to do a little bit of rethinking about it. You might well have seen some commentary about, you know, people's choices about how they travel to work, or if they travel to work, or if they work from home more often. So all of these things are going to be things that we're going to need to think about as a community. I see down there's a mention of the sporting arena, and obviously we are just starting to get back into being able to get onto our sporting fields, but that's a slow process as well. So looking forward to doing that. Next slide, please, Olivia. So as I said, COVID has had a significant impact on a lot of businesses. Many businesses were not even able to trade at all during the level 4, and then many of them even in the level 3 situation. Even in level 2, some, particularly in the events area, are not able to trade to any significant degree. So there's a big impact on those businesses. But there's also a big impact on the business, which the council is. So we would usually rely, roughly a third of our income comes from user charges of various different sorts, or we also have external income from the likes of the airport. And we've predicted that the impact on council, the business, of lost revenue between 2019-20, that's the year we're currently in, and 2020-21 will be something close to $70 million. So that's a huge impact on us. And that's from things like lost revenue from parking charges, venues, all the different recreation facilities, the airport dividend. We're not expecting to get 2 years in a row of airport dividend, given that there's very few planes flying. The other thing to mention here is that we already had significant cost pressures on us. So we are in the 3rd year of the 2018 to 2028 long-term plan, 10-year budget. And the 3rd year was planned, not predicted, but planned, which is the year we're just coming into, to have a 7.1% rates increase. The year after that, the plan was for 6.8, the year after that 6.2%, and the year after that 7.0%. So it's nearly 28% in rates increases over the 4 years we're about to come into. And that excluded provision for Let's Get Wellington Moving, Civic Square and the Central Library. It excluded any extra investment in the 3 waters. It excluded investment in the 3 temporary libraries in the central city, and it certainly excluded any investment to pick up the costs of COVID-19, that $70 million I just mentioned. So we have some serious financial challenges in front of us. Next slide, please, Olivia. So when we went into the lockdown situation, our key, we obviously understood that it's going to have a really significant impact on business and on jobs. And so our key immediate response, and we were pretty quick on this, I think Hamilton got in there before us, but I think we were the second council in the country to put in a comprehensive pandemic response and recovery package. And what we were looking to do there is to reduce the impact of our business and our costs on our ratepayers. So the things we included right up front were to say that in the 2019-20 year, we would allow for the deferral of rates for anybody who could show that they were significantly affected by COVID-19. And that was most of the business community and also some members of the residential community whose jobs are affected. And so the rates bill that many of you will have got, most of us, well, as ratepayers will have got in the last few days, you will be able to defer that without the usual 10% penalty. And that deferral will allow you to pay that in December rather than by the 1st of June. The second part of that was that we also said that we would freeze a lot of our council charges, fees, and where we're the landlord, we would also freeze those as well. So we're trying to take the impost off, any impost that we were imposing on the community, off the community to make it the impact as light as possible. We also spent a lot of time and energy in the welfare area, particularly looking after those who are the most vulnerable in our community. So it was council working with the likes of the City Mission, DCM, the Soup Kitchen, who had, it must be said, a reasonably significantly increased demand for their services. So we worked really collaboratively with them through the lockdown at level 3 period. The other thing we put a lot of energy into, and will continue to put a lot of energy into, is recovery plan. We are going to have to work very, very hard, particularly to draw people back into the central city. We have, I think, the best central city in the country. And it is the heart not only of our city, but also of our region. And of course, we are the capital city. So really, really important that we get people back into our central city. We build some confidence there, and we build support for retail, hospitality, and all the businesses that there are in our central city. So we're doing a lot of work in the recovery area. Obviously, we don't know quite when we'll go into a level 1 situation, when things can open up, but we're working to try and be as flexible as possible to be able to deliver that plan. Next slide, please, Olivia. The second part of our response is this annual plan, which we're considering today. And really, the challenge we had in front of us was to balance rates with the services that we provide. So we could have said, well, we're going to chop a lot of services. That would have required us to go out and do a special consultative process, which we didn't have enough time to do. But we are trying to minimise the rates increase while trying to make sure we provide the services that our community wants, and also while making sure that we continue to invest in the future of the city. So we will get past COVID, but we will, then have opportunities and challenges that we have as a city. And, we are an incredible city, and we want to make our city even better. And so that's what we are going to continue to do, is to continue to invest in the future of our city as well, and the transformation of our city. We think we've got the balance about right. We started off with a 9.2% rates increase that was being proposed just before we went into the COVID situation. And we've trimmed that back to 5.1, or there is an option there for 2.3, and I'll come back to that later on. Next slide, please, Olivia. I've already mentioned that we expect to lose something up to $70 million. You'll see the 38 there, and an 11 million from user charges, which we're going to impose, which we are not planning to impose at this stage. So the biggest one of those, biggest two of those, I should say, one is was building consent fee increases, and that was to reflect the increased cost of delivering building consents, partly because of competition from government for our building consent staff. So we had to increase wages and salaries there, because otherwise we'd have lost a whole lot of our staff. And the second part of that was going to be some changes in various parking revenue. The 38 million includes things like the airport dividend and the other losses and fees and charges which we expect over the 2020-2021 year. And as I said earlier, we expect to lose about $20 million in the period between the lockdown starting and the end of June in the 2019-20 year. If we were to fund that from rates today and say, look, we need to balance our budget today, it would increase our rates charges by about 12% on top of the 5% we're talking about. That's really not going to be palatable at any stage, and clearly not now when so many ratepayers are going to struggle to pay those rates. So what we've chosen to do is to debt fund this. So we're essentially going to spread those costs of that $70-odd million over a 10-year period. Next slide, please, Olivia. As I said, we also need to continue to invest in the future of the city. We are focused very much on sustainability, on resilience. We did ask the question about what would happen if we had an earthquake under the COVID lockdown, which didn't really bear thinking about it, but we did have to think about it and how we would prepare for that situation. We also want to keep on investing in the livability of the city. We have an incredibly livable city. It's widely regarded as one of the most livable cities in the world, and we want to keep investing in that and continuing to improve the city that we all love. So what are the projects there? I think we'll flick over to the next slide because that covers all of those anyway. Thanks, Olivia. So key projects for 2020-21. Three Waters, we've proposed an extra $2.9 million investment in the Three Waters. And the two key areas there, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we understand the state of our assets at the moment and whether we need to invest more and where we need to invest more. So we're investing in essentially the inspection and giving us that surety of that we know what we're talking about. And we're also investing in what's called roving crews to go out and check for things like leaks and problems in the system so that we can fix those. I set up a mayoral task force with council support, and we are working through those issues as well. They will flow through into the asset management plans and then the long-term plan for next year. But we're putting in $2.9 million this year. Convention and Exhibition Centre, construction continues on that. It's about 800 jobs involved in the construction and supply chains associated with that. And that started in September last year. The St James Theatre also well underway, and that's aimed to be finished by the end of 2021. It's going to be really tight. It was always going to be really tight because, of course, it's got to be ready for the Festival of the Arts in February 2022. And, of course, COVID came along, so it's going to be a really tight run to get that ready on time. Tanako Civic Precinct, including the Central Library. Look, I know there's going to be some questions about the Central Library, but we had a paper which we put out yesterday about that, and that will be available for you to have a look at. Engineering information will go out unpromised on Monday. And Tanako Civic Precinct, anybody who's been down there will notice that there's a lot of buildings there which their futures are uncertain, so we need to do some thinking about those, and that's going to be a really big community conversation. We've allocated $1 million, or just over $1 million, to help that conversation over the next year. The town hall you see there in the picture, that's the strengthening work is well underway with that. That is, again, like the convention centre, intended to be opened in 2023. And Let's Get Wellington Moving. We put Let's Get Wellington Moving projects up into the shovel-ready list. In fact, we put things related to several of these in the shovel-ready list bid to government. And in Let's Get Wellington Moving, we're looking to accelerate walking, cycling and public transport investment. We're also working with our partners NZTA and Greater Wellington Regional Council on the acceleration of the business cases for mass transit and for state highway work. Next slide, please, Olivia. And just some local community projects. The first two of these are resilience projects, both of them in the Onslow Western Ward. Ngā Gorge, we've been waiting for that slip repair and stabilisation work. A lot of background work has been done on that. It's a big job, as I think anybody who's been past it will see, and that work is to start this year. Wadestown, anybody who lives in Wadestown will see the major piece of strengthening work at the bottom of the hill there as you come into Grant Road. And then during the budget discussions, we've also agreed to include some money for home energy audits, which supports our desire to be a carbon neutral city. And also we put some money aside for weed and pest control. And this is about continuing our environmental restoration journey. We're doing a great job with predator free, but we haven't done as much as we probably need to in controlling invasive weeds as well. So that supports that. And we've also said, on behalf of the council, I've put up our hand and said, look, we're very interested in being part of the government's Jobs for Nature, which was announced as part of the budget a week and a bit ago. We're also investing in a number of community centres, Newlands Park, and also the Alex Moore Park Sports Hub. Next slide, please. Thanks, Olivia. And look, the two slides here, one's about 5.1% increase and the other's about 2.3. Normally, I would always say, let's go for the lower one. The issue, what's the difference between the two? Well, essentially what we do with all of our assets is we revalue them every 3 years, and we've revalued our Three Waters assets in the last year. And we do that because the cost of replacing them tends to go up over time. So obviously the cost of putting in a new pipe today is going to be more than it was 20 years ago, and will be less than it will be in, say, 20 years' time. And so we revalue them. What we then do is we depreciate them, which essentially is to say, well, they're getting older, so therefore their use life is less. And then we use that depreciation to fund the renewals. That is effectively the replacement. So that's a pipe which is replacing an old pipe, for example. If we go for the 2.3%, that means we would have less money available to do that, or we would borrow to do that, and then we put it on the credit card effectively. So we're recommending the 5.1 because that essentially balances our budget here rather than the 2.3, which would just put more money on debt or give us less money to fund that crucial infrastructure. And I think that takes me to the end of the slides. You can jump over that one. Thanks, Olivia. Right, and it takes Esther, it's back to you with a quick poll.
Yes.
Thank you.
So,
thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Andy. So just to help us decide which questions we're going to pick up on now, this poll asks you whether you have, and if you could launch that, Olivia, whether you've understood the difference between the two trades options. Not whether you agree with them or not, but whether they made sense to you, because that will help us decide which questions we pick up next. So just choose the answer that makes most sense to you. Sure does, quite a lot. Don't understand it all, and you need more time to have an opinion. So how's that poll going, Olivia?
Yep, so we've got well over half of our participants have voted in that poll now. So I'm just going to close that and share those results with you.
Very good. So there's nobody who doesn't understand the trade-offs at all, and a few people will need more time to have an opinion on that, and fair enough. So Diane Livingston, in fact, Senior Engagement Officer at the Wellington City Council, has been fielding your questions, both your pre-registration questions, and I can see others that have come in here. So Diane, what's your first question to our mayor?
Hi, Esther. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Terrific, thank you. Lots of questions just now. Thank you, everybody. That was pretty busy. We've had quite a few questions come in about the Central Library. So Sandy put one in at registration, and just running my eye over, we've got questions from Francis, Pauline, Hilary, and Lance also has some questions around this. So Andy, can you give us a bit of an update on what's happening with the Central Library?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we know it's something which people absolutely love. It's such a precious asset for our city, and so finally, we were in a position where we were expecting to come to you with a paper at the end of March or the very first week of April, and of course then COVID came along and sort of made that impossible, particularly because we lost a lot of staff who had to go and do COVID-related work. So we put the paper into the public arena yesterday. That will be considered by council on Wednesday next week. And the paper essentially gives you some rough order costs of what it will cost to strengthen the library to different levels. So we've got a low, medium and high level of strengthening. And it also gives some alternative costs if you were to build a new building of various different sizes. The comparative being used as the Christchurch Central Library Tuaranga as the smaller end, and then going up to a larger size building. And it's also officers are asking for us for authority to say, let's go and do a significant consultation. The numbers are very large in dollar terms, and that's why we have to do a consultation. It's also why we have to put options out there, and we're required to do that under the Local Government Act.
So more to come on that. You've been working behind the scenes. Absolutely. And more to come on that. Yes. And we know we're precious.
It's going to be a big decision. And the other part is it needs to relate to Civic Square as a whole as well.
Excellent. Very good. Another question, Diane?
Yep. Just quickly, I just want to touch on what Lance has asked about here, which is to do with whether we need a convention centre given the COVID situation. And it might be something that we kind of talk about in the panel as well. But just quickly, Andy, from your perspective.
Yeah, well, look, I think there's a high degree of confidence that we will still need a convention centre. The convention centre does two things. One is, well, at least pre-COVID, it was doing two things. One is it was to protect existing jobs, and secondly, it was to make sure that we had a place in the market. So obviously, other parts of New Zealand are developing convention centres as well. Auckland's had a significant setback. But, you know, we are the centre of the country. We're also the seat of government. So we think there will always be a strong demand for conventions. The other part, of course, is that we're actually building it. And so we've spent something like $60 million on it already in terms of the construction, the land, the design, and all those sort of things. And we also have a contractual obligation to the companies that are doing the building and their subcontractors, etc. So were we to pull out of it, we would probably face a very, very large damages claim. We could end up spending, I've been saying sort of $90-odd million, and end up with nothing other than some concrete on the ground, which probably would not be a very good investment for Wellington. So we still think it'll be a good investment for Wellington, and most of it is being paid for by the business community who support it too.
Thank you, Andy. Now, I see a lot more questions coming in, Diane, but I think most of them could relate to the panel, unless you had something you wanted to pick up now.
No, I think that's a terrific idea.
Yep, awesome. We'll bring them back in. Thank you very much.
I'll duck off and I'll leave it for Jenny for a moment.
Please, and Jenny, if you could come on in. Welcome, Jenny. Welcome, Councillor Condi, and I'll hand it over to you for a brief presentation on the parking policy.
Thanks very much. All right, if we could have the next slide, Olivia, please. Thank you. So I'm here to talk about the draft parking policy today, and the first most important thing you need to know about the policy is that nothing in this policy will change what is happening on parking on our streets right now. The parking policy is really a new framework about how we're going to make decisions about prioritising our parking space over the next 10 years. But nothing in here will change the parking on your street or any of the streets in our city right away. The idea behind having this framework is that we've got a lot of on-street space at the moment that we use for parking, and it's really precious public space, and we can't sadly make our streets any wider. We've got some geographical constraints in Wellington that mean we can't create more on-street space. So we have to think about how we're going to prioritise that space and what do we want to use it for. And that's what this parking policy is really all about. It'll provide transparency going forward about how we make decisions. So if we come to your street or your suburb and you've got a parking problem, it'll be really clear how officers are going to be making decisions about what to prioritise. The other thing we need to do and think about is that we need to support a change in how we travel. So Let's Get Wellington Moving is all about moving more people with fewer vehicles. And that means that we need to offer them other options and support things like walking, cycling, and public transport. And those other options require space on our streets as well. So we have to think about how we're going to prioritise space for things like bus lanes and cycle lanes and wider footpaths compared to how we prioritise our space for parking and what kind of parking that should be. The policy is focused particularly on council parking. We can't control private company-owned parking, so things like Wilson's are outside of our control and they're outside of this policy. What we're mostly talking about with council parking is on-street parking. As I've said, council controls very little off-street parking in the city. So really this policy is about our on-street space. Next slide, please. So an overview of what's in the policy, as I said, because it's a framework, sets out our objectives and our principles about how we're going to make decisions about our on-street space and what should have priority. It also sets out a parking space hierarchy, which is which type of parking we're going to prioritise in different parts of the city. So in some streets or parts of the city, we would prioritise these as transport corridors, and so bus lanes and cycleways might have the priority. Other parts of the city, we might prioritise retail parking, which would be P120 parking, so that we have good turnover, so stores get lots of customers through their doors during the day. Other parts of the city, we might prioritise different kinds of parking, like residence parking. So these are some of the conversations that we really want you to get involved with, because we want to know what you think about what we should prioritise. The policy also sets out a new approach to area-based planning of parking, as well as a new approach to pricing, and sets out really clearly what our parking management hierarchy is, which is really our toolkit. If we come to your street and you say, oh, we've got a problem with parking, I can never get a park here, these are the tools that council can use to try and solve that problem. Next slide, please. I'll talk about those three on the next 3 slides. So an area-based approach is really a new approach to parking in our city and how we deal with these problems. At the moment, if you've got a problem with parking, you come and say, I can never find a park here. Our officers and transport engineers, they'll go and look at that particular street and they'll fix the problem on that street. And when we make changes on the road, what we find is then that the problem just spills over into the neighbouring streets. And then we go and fix those neighbouring streets and the problem spills over to other places. And we just end up chasing our tails. The idea behind an area-based approach is that we would come and look at a whole area together, possibly a whole suburb, and put together a parking policy or a parking plan for that whole suburb. And that means we can have really different kinds of conversations as well. So we can talk about what are the facilities in the area, what are the other transport options that we have for getting to those facilities. We can bring other people into the conversation rather than just our transport engineers. We can bring people in from those community facilities. We can bring in large employers. So for example, in Newtown, you could talk to the DHB about parking and how we can work with them. So it means we can have much more holistic conversations about parking and transport with those communities as we make those plans. Next slide, please. There's also a new proposal around pricing for parking called demand-based pricing. Now, again, nothing in this policy will result in changes on the streets immediately. So nothing in this policy would result in changes to pricing of parking, but this would signal a new direction for us about how we think about pricing parking in our city. At the moment, when we price parking, we set pretty much the same price all across the city, all across the day, and we change that price very rarely, sometimes not for years and years at a time. But we know that we have different demand for parking at different parts of the city. So we know at Courtney Place, end of the city, parking demand is high in the evenings and pretty low during the day. Whereas in Lambton Quay, we know it's high during the day and pretty low in the evening. And the idea behind demand-based pricing is we could set different prices for different parts of the city, for different times of the day, to reflect how much demand there is for that parking. When demand is high, the price should be high, and then people might be willing to park a bit further away and walk a bit further. And when demand is low, then the price should be lower because, you know, people should be able to go in and use those empty parks. So that's the idea behind demand-based pricing, is that the prices change more quickly, more frequently, and they reflect how much demand there is in a specific area or at a specific time. This policy has been implemented in a number of cities around the world really successfully, and closer to home, Auckland have been using a demand-based pricing model for several years really successfully. So we'd love to hear from you about what you think about that approach to pricing. And finally, the management hierarchy approach. As I said, this is our toolkit. If we have to come into a suburb and say, we've got a problem, there's too much demand for parking here, how are we going to fix that? These are the tools we have at our disposal. The first thing we would look at is say, are the rules being enforced at the moment, the current rules? So we would look at increasing monitoring and enforcement, bringing in more parking wardens to make sure that people are obeying the rules that are already there. If that's not enough to help us with the problem, then we can look at changing some of the rules. So we could bring in time restrictions. So for example, if you've got an area where lots of people are parking informally for park and ride and parking on the street all day to commute, then we might need to change that to P120 so that people can access things like shops more easily. And those commuters just have to park another block away possibly. We can look at parking designations and user restrictions. So that's things like bringing in residence parking or loading zones or mobility parking, anything that says that this is only for a particular type of use. And then if we've still got a problem after that, we can look at bringing in charging to an area that hasn't had it before. Or if the area does have charging, we can look at increasing those charges. And this comes back to that demand-based pricing, that where demand is high, the price should be high to help us manage that issue. Finally, we can look at, if none of those have helped us with this problem, we can look at the sourcing alternatives. This comes into the area-based approach. So we might look at what are the other transport issues we have in this area that we might be able to solve. Can we work with facilities, shops, employers in this area to provide alternatives? And finally, if we need to, can we look at providing some kind of increased supply off-street and work with private providers to provide off-street parking? And those are the ways that we would be able to work through a problem and try to address it. So it gives you really a lot of transparency about how we would approach these things. Next slide, please. So we're at questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. I notice, Diane, that we haven't had a lot of questions about parking come up live. People are more interested in local issues and in the annual plan. But we do have one question from pre-registration that perhaps we could ask now.
Yep, this one's from Dan. And the question is, how will the parking policy be changed to reflect the growing shift to public transport, investment by citizens and the council?
Thanks for the question. It's really, as I said, it's about how we prioritise our on-street space. And at the moment in the parking policy, if you look at the hierarchies we've got, bus lanes are the #1 priority. If we need a bus lane through there, they should have priority for on-street space. And following that, other kinds of things. So the parking policy as it's currently written really prioritises buses and public transport for use in our streets. And we want to hear from you about whether you think we've got that right.
Excellent. We'll leave it there. I do see there have been 1 or 2 questions, but we'll publish those in frequently asked questions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Conde. And I'll invite the rest of the panel back in now. Welcome back. Again, apologies for those of you who arrived later. Apologies from Councillor Matthews, who unfortunately had to travel to a very ill family member, and greatly disappointed not to be here today. But you all are, so let's start fielding those questions. And I'd like to kick us off by asking our local ward councillors, Simon and Diane, if you could talk to our attendees today about what does the annual plan mean for me and my community?
And I'll let you go first. Ladies first.
Thanks, Simon. Well, I think what the annual plan is, and I probably have a different opinion to some of my colleagues. I think the annual plan should, at this particular year, should be responding more to the conditions set by COVID-19. And I've been picking up a lot of feedback from the community saying, there's not a lot of difference. This is BAU. Where are you really making the cuts? And I have to say, if you look on page 5 of the annual plan, and there's some additional initiatives have been put in, have been agreed to by the majority of council. And when we're in this situation, putting in extra things into this plan, which actually took us up from a 4.95% rates increase to a 5.1, is it appropriate? And I think what I'm really asking is our community to make sure that they do have a say, because this is a draft annual plan, and we really need to take into account where people think we should be spending our money. And the government also released its budget last week, and it had a lot of contributions to different things. And if you look at it, a couple of things that we wanted to put extra money into pest control and home energy audits. The government's already put $1 billion into extra into pest control, and it's also putting money into home energy as well, in terms of helping with installation. So I think we really need to start taking those things into consideration. And don't forget, when you pay your rates, you're paying 15% GST on those rates as well, which is going into government coffers. So I'm really just challenging our community as well to provide us with some more information about what they think.
Awesome, thank you. Big plea there, please put in your submissions. And Simon.
Yeah, no, I endorse what Diane says about the economy. Absolutely, 100%. And being a little bit more nimble and agile with our dealings with central government will help us out as well, just so that we can make the most of the funding that they've got on offer. Additionally, I think that the next priority is reliable core services. The livability aspect of Wellington in the past has been one of its biggest assets, and we can't forget that. And we've also had our problems in some of the areas that I say are unsexy, like infrastructure, pipes, the 3 waters. Those are essential for people to have confidence in. We really need to ensure that those areas that aren't seen as being the bells and whistles are the areas that do contain priorities. So that's really important to a lot of Wellingtonians.
Thank you, Simon. Any final comments on that, Andy, before we move to participant questions?
Yeah, look, I'm not a million miles away from where Diane and Simon are coming from. I've always been a relatively fiscal conservative, and if we can find places that we can save money, I'm all for looking at those. We did task the chief executive with doing some work to look for efficiencies, and we also said, and we agreed this as a council, that we would also contribute to that process. So we've got just under a month, or just over a month, I should say, to complete that work, and any suggestions that you've got in terms of the place that we should put what is your money, and the place that we shouldn't put your money, would be really appreciated. So please do make submissions to that effect.
And we'll talk to you later about that, those submissions and how you can do that. Simon, you've got another comment.
Yeah, I just wish to say to people that this is part of a consultation and feedback, and we are certainly listening at this time. And there'll be people out there in our communities that will have some great ideas. I know that there'll be people also that will have some of the negatives, but also, in the past, we probably haven't listened as well as what we should have. And at the moment, it's really essential that we are cognizant of that, and that we take on board our constituents and our community feedback. Yeah, absolutely. If we can make some changes with the help of our community, that would be a really, really good thing.
And you'll be pleased to hear that some ideas are coming through in the questions panel, so we look forward to sharing those with you for your consideration. Diane, next question, please.
Yep, thanks. I'm going to group, we've got lots of questions about how the annual plan has been adjusted given the current environment. So I've got one here from Andrea, which is why councillors, oh, I beg your pardon, not that one. What changes have been carried out regarding the annual plan to reflect a post-COVID environment? And along that line as well, Lance is asking about why have we only got two options, 5.1 or 2.3, in relation to the rates. And Chris is asking about, have we thought about reconsidering how we spend the money given the situation that we're in? So I think it's a bit about what is in the annual plan that is different based on today's environment.
So who would like to pick that question up?
I should probably start off with that one, I think, okay. Esther. Yeah, because that is very much an annual plan question. So look, the number of things there. I suspect it was Chris. I think was the middle question there in terms of why did we only put up the 5.1 or the 2.3? Well, at least we put up options, because by and large, usually in the past, council has just said the number is whatever it was, and didn't give any option. So we've given an option there. I suspect what you're asking is why didn't we put a zero option in there? And we could have put a zero option in there, but the only way we'd have got to a zero is we'd have had to make some significant service cuts to do that. We could certainly get some efficiencies, but they wouldn't have got us all the way there. And we get into significant service cuts, and we were talking around sort of $15–16 million. That would have meant that we'd have needed to do a special consultative process, and there's a whole lot of requirements, audit requirements, special consultative process requirements, which were just simply not possible in the time frame we've got. Now, having said that, I mean, essentially look at this as a 2-year proposition. So it's this year's annual plan and next year's long-term plan, which is really the bigger one. And that is a place where we ought to be looking for where are the services that we want to keep providing, are the services that perhaps we don't want to keep providing. So that is, as I said, I will welcome people's views on where are the things that they see as discretionary that maybe we shouldn't be doing. And any ideas for savings as well.
Excellent. Simon or Diane, do you have any further comments to add to that?
The only thing I would say is Andy did, when he did his annual plan presentation, did talk about how we were increasing quite a large percentage of the user fees, and keeping costs down, such as that, given COVID-19. And I know we're looking for $3 million worth of savings, but I actually think that's pretty, when you think we spend over 500 million in operational expenditure a year, that's only really 0.5%. So I think we should be looking for more, and we've got to look at some of those big ticket items, especially in that project space. So so I think we'll just let others have a say. Simon?
Yeah, cutting our cloth is really, really important at this time as well. As I said, definitely not in the core services, but it's a really good time for any business to have a look at itself. And council is a business, like I run a business. I've tried my best to ensure that my overheads are as good as what they can be, and you know, like I'll be taking to the CE in the next week a page and a half of cost efficiencies that I think we can handle, not just cuts, but areas that we could actually gain revenue with as well. So, you know, we have some things that, you know, perhaps we're not taking advantage of, where we could be, you know, raising more funds outside of rates.
Very good. And I see some further suggestions have come in for you, which we look forward to sharing with you for your consideration. Diane, next question.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to move this around to population growth. So we've had quite a few questions come in around that topic. Dan asks, how can the western suburbs help Wellington's growing population by holding higher density housing? And we've also got some things along that theme from Andrea and Megan. So yeah, population growth. What can happen in the western suburbs?
Simon
Diane,
or
do you want
Diane,
to start?
one of you want to?
Yeah, I should probably start off with that one as well. Yeah. So we were.
Andy, we're just going to give that to Diane first.
Oh, sorry. Go on, Diane. Sorry.
It's all right. It's all right, Andy. I know you've got a lot to say.
Oh, that one.
I think you know, we've had this planning for growth with projections of seeing 50 to 80,000 more people in our city over the next 30 years. But we really need to start re-looking at those assumptions due to COVID-19, and the same for the Let's Get Welly Moving. And they're two key projects, or big spending projects, that we could probably make some savings at to start with. But we really need to go back and look at those assumptions. But all the suburbs can provide some form of intensification, and in particular around our town centre village areas, we can look at more densification, especially with buildings. I know Karori Town Centre, we've got opportunity there with new buildings going up. They should, you know, we should be encouraging extra heights there. But it comes back to, we can't. The world's been upside down, turned in the last few months. And what we're also seeing is people want to live differently as well. So where we thought that intensification may have been, you know, there's different stories coming out of that now.
Thank you. I'm going to go over to Andy and Simon. You've got some comments you want to make too.
Yeah, we were about to go out to consult on. In fact, we started the pre-consultation effectively for planning for growth. We'd obviously done some big consultation last year about densification versus spreading out, and the public had told us in no uncertain terms that densification, and that fitted with the desire to be a lower carbon city. So we were about to go for that. We've had to pause that. We paused it because the engagement would have required a lot of face-to-face engagement, which we couldn't do during the COVID, well, any of the COVID situations, actually, even at level 2. We also, as Diane said, we're going to have to take a little bit of a rethink about some of these things as well, because the growth rate is going to be less than it was before. I mean, roughly speaking, close to 50% of growth in the country in terms of population was migrant growth. In other words, people coming into for long-term migration. And so clearly that's not going to be here for at least 2 or 3 years, you'd think. So that alone will make a significant difference. And so we're going to have to get the crystal balls out and probably do a little bit of scenario planning as to how much the growth needs to be. Can the western suburbs play a part in whatever the growth level we need to accommodate is? The answer is yes, everywhere's got to play a part. And that was the intent of the planning for growth engagement. So we will be doing that engagement. It'll just take a little bit of a step back before we step forward.
Thank you, Andy. Simon, final comment.
Yeah, this will be close to Andy's heart as well. Yeah, we've got a district plan review that is, you know, it's on the work plan at the moment. It's a really important piece of work because we haven't updated our district plan in any serious way for about 14 or 15 years. Andy, you were the architect, I think. It goes back a long way anyhow.
The last bit I think came in about 2014, 15 thereabouts, by the time we got 72 and 73.
That was piecemeal. And I think that, you know, having a look at our district plan and doing some work there is really important, but it's also important that the government gets their Resource Management Act sorted out as well, because if they don't work in tandem, they don't work at all, and that's the struggle that we've had at least over the last 6 years that I've been on council. So that's a really important, two pieces of important work that have to sync into each other.
Excellent, thank you. Diane, next question, and Diane, you've got something else to say to that? Sorry, Diane Calvert, Councillor Calvert.
Not me.
Yeah. No, look, I just wanted to add just a little something to that, because we did talk about the parking policy, and the parking policy and the planning for growth go hand in hand. One of my concerns is that we through the planning for growth, we may well allow properties to be built without off-street parking. And what does that do to the on-street parking on our streets? So I think we really need to make sure that we are we understand any unintended consequences of our parking policy.
Yeah.
And our planning for growth.
Really good point, Diane.
Diane Livingston, is this a time to pick up one of the parking questions?
Oh, yes.
To the Western?
Well, let me look for one of those, because we've had a few come in, but I'm going to ask this one while I look, because I think this is a goodie. This is from Jeff, and it's another topic altogether, and his question is, I'm concerned about the councillors not working cooperatively for the sake of the city. I'm sure that's not the case, and I just thought the councillors might like to say something about that.
Who would like to start?
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah, we have had a difficult start. Like there were a lot of unexpecteds that did occur, and there was a lot of insecurity around councillors in the first weeks. I think that the media's picked up on that, and some of us have put our foot down and said enough. That enough has actually happened, and I think that we are working a lot more closely together, a lot more collaboratively together, and credit to the mayor as well. I think he's done a really good job, particularly in the last month or so, in settling things down, bringing in a facilitator who's done really well with us, and we've done really well with her. And I think that the next couple of months will really tell if that's had a good effect. I believe it will have, and I think that that start actually begins now.
Excellent. Now, unless the two of you would like to counter that with a different opinion, you agree?
I'm not going to counter it. I'll just reinforce it. So thanks, Simon. Yeah. Look, just to say, it has been a difficult start. There's obviously a lot of the politics playing out in the public arena, which wasn't helpful. But we are, I think, coming together. We have had a number of facilitated sessions. And I think we're getting to the stage of working out how we want to work together more constructively. So, I hope that will be something. We need that to happen for Wellington. To go forward, we need a team of 15 people. We'll have differences of views, that's fine, but it's us working constructively together, and I think that's where we're getting to.
Wellington,
and a very fair question.
And we've got time for just a couple more questions. So I'll get you to speed up your answers so we can get some more questions through. Diane. Livingston.
Okay, I'm going to throw it over to the transport thing. So this is a question from Lisa, and it's to do with improving public transport options. And she mentions park and ride in particular.
Yeah, I can go there. We're certainly looking at park and ride options. There are park and ride around Wharangi, Onslow, Western, particularly in Ngāo, and not so much Kandala, but going to Johnsonville. We've also talked with some property developers here in Karori about releasing some land perhaps for park and ride. We've also talked to some of our officers about some of the land that's not being used for park and ride as well. It is a really important area for incentivising public transport.
Thank you. Next question, Diane.
Everyone wants to know about free weekend parking. What's the plan?
I think you're dealing with... no, Andy, let me go.
Simon, go on. Go for it.
Let me go. Because I think the three of us, that the panelists, we're in favour of a certain amount of free weekend parking. I think it's really important at the moment that we incentivise the city, not just because of the shopping, but because there also is a fair few other reasons, like it's our churches, for instance, and I just want to pay tribute to our religious organisations over COVID. They've done remarkably well. and they've helped our communities. And I think that that's just one reason that we should open up some free parking in the weekends, particularly on a Sunday morning, and incentivise our retail. So I think Diane, Andy, and I are quite in agreement to that.
Very good.
Hope we are.
Yeah, look, I think
Diane, can I ask for a question to Diane before we?
Sorry, just before you go to that one, just on the free weekend parking. Now, as Jenny Condi presented earlier on parking, if you think that's something that matters to you, then please make a submission to that effect as part of the parking.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Diane, a question to Diane before we do some general wrap up.
Great. This one is from Tony, and he says the annual plan mentions support to improve suburban centres. Given there is no reduction in the capital plan, what are the plans to improve suburban centres in Western Onslow ward?
There's no specific program of work, but what I've been working with is with officers is that we will do a piece of work for Northland community. The Northland community a couple of years ago came up with a concept of how to improve basically their pathway between the village, the community centre and the school, and they came up with some really great concept plans. Officers have undertaken to do a piece of work on that. There is also another piece of work, hopefully that will happen in Berhampore, which is another sort of small village part, and talking with officers, they will use both those, Northland and Berhampore, as case studies then to develop up a small suburban village program of work that will then come into the long-term plan, so that we can see some more work happening on a regular basis around our suburban villages. But just to make a point about Karori being one of the large suburban centre of our city or of our ward, excuse me, there is work on that, hopefully due to start later in the year on improving that centre. Simon might want to comment on that too.
Thank you. Final comment from you, Simon, on that.
No, I just I was going to bring up the Koori Town Centre project, and I think that that's going to be a goodie.
Very good. So this is a question for all of you as part of our wrap up. In these tough times, what do you each see as a priority? Let's start with Simon. May we start with you?
I do believe the economy and concentrating on retaining Wellington as being a vibrant and safe community. You know, that it's the absolute essential that we reinvigorate our events, but more so probably our retail, and that we incentivise jobs. I think that the jobs one is probably the biggest priority.
Andy, your comments?
Look, I agree with Simon. I think the key is that where we're going to suffer the most is going to be downtown, and we need to support those businesses. We need to support the jobs that those businesses provide, and that means drawing people back into the central city. It means giving people some confidence. It means a program of events and activities that supports that. So that's probably the key, because if we don't have a central city that functions very well, the rest of the city won't either.
Thank you. And finally, Diane?
Look, I think it's our economy is my priority, making sure that we as a council are open for business, so that we are supporting, doing what we can. It's not about a handout, but a hand up, but not forgetting about our suburban centres as well, because there's a lot of small businesses there. And also, as we start seeing more people working from home, they'll probably be tapping into the suburban village centres area much more. So we mustn't lose sight of what we can do there. But we really do need to focus on key priorities and not try and provide everything that normally we may do as a council. We need to sort of work on the most important things to start with, at least for the next 12 months anyway.
Very good.
I think we're in agreement across the three of us on all these.
And finally, to wrap us, Simon and Diane, I don't think we've had that question here, but across the wards, we've had some people asking, why should they submit? What happens to their submissions? It takes time. Why bother? Can you tell us why the people of Wharangi should bother submitting?
I'll go first. It's really, really important. I make an effort to read through submissions myself. I think that's important. most of the great ideas that have come to Wellington have not necessarily been through councillors. It's actually been through feedback that we've had from members of our community as to what their aspirations and their vision is. Even some of the things that you might not think of being up there in the past, there have been people that have submitted that have been the people that have been behind implementing something. And I think if we don't listen to people at this time, we're being really silly. And if we don't implement some of what we listen to that is good, then that's a problem as well.
Thank you, Simon. And finally, Diane.
Yeah, now more than ever, it's really important for everyone to have a say, because otherwise we're in danger of just hearing from the same people, from the same lobby groups, and that does skew the, potentially the decision making, because, that's, because I'll give you an example, the innovating streets, the community didn't really have a chance to have a say in what those proposals would be. But what we had was a focus in particular areas without the local communities even being consulted with. And I know within our Wharangi Onslow Western Ward, we had a lot of good opportunities, but they didn't make the first cut. So I'm just saying, please have your say. Please, if you've got any ideas, whether you think it's part of the annual plan or not, please share with them, and please share with the council as a whole.
Yeah. Fantastic. So on that note, Olivia, if you could bring up our final slides, and we're going to show, yes, first of all, here's some questions from today that came up that we didn't have time to answer, but the officers will be working on those and posting those as frequently asked questions on the Let's Talk website. So apologies we didn't get there. The next slide, you've just heard the plea from your councillors. Next slide, please, Olivia. These are the different ways that you can have your say on annual plan or other aspects of your community. The Let's Talk Wellington website, social media opportunities. You can email your submission to these email addresses, and there's also a dedicated consultation helpline to help you with that process. So your councillors are pleading with you to please submit. So let's find out from you what you are interested in submitting, if at all. And Olivia, if you could raise up our final poll and let us know what you plan to provide feedback on, if at all. You can tick more than one box here. So annual plan, parking policy, not sure, or you definitely won't be providing feedback. So are we getting some answers into that, Olivia?
Yes, those answers are coming in, and I just want to give our participants today a few more moments to get those in for us. We've had just over half of our participants today answer there, and we've got some really great answers. So I'm just going to close those and share with you now.
Oh, wow.
That's good.
Oh, wow. This is the community the webinar that so far has told us way and beyond the highest number of submissions planned. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. On behalf of your councillors, thank you for that.
I'm not surprised, to be honest.
What a great community, eh? What a great community.
Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, so in closing, as is the tikanga, as is the custom of Council Andy, could you close us with a karakia?
Well, thank you again, everyone, for coming along and for joining us. And we look forward to hearing what you've got to say in terms of your submissions. I'll go to the karakia. Unuhia, 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 ki te uru tapunui. Kia watia, kia mama, te nākau titinana, te wairua, I te ara takatau. Koe rā e rongo, whakarea ake ki ronga. Kia watia, ai rā kua watia.
Kia ora.
Amen.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you, everyone.
Mā te wā.